In the Philippines, marriage is seen as this sacred, protected institution. But what actually happens when that vow, that promise, starts to crumble? Today, we're going to unpack the really tricky and honestly kind of surprising legal maze of ending a marriage in a country that doesn't have absolute divorce for its citizens. It's a system full of strict rules, very specific loopholes, and definitions that are always changing. Okay, let's just dive right in with a real-life legal head-scratcher. So picture this. A Filipino man gets a divorce in another country, he remarries, starts a whole new family, builds a new life. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But here's the question. In the eyes of Philippine law, was that second marriage even real? This one question unlocks the very first major rule we have to get our heads around. And that rule, well, it's the bedrock of everything we're going to talk about today. It's called the nationality rule. This is a huge legal principle that follows every single Filipino citizen, and I mean it, no matter where you are in the world. This rule basically says that Philippine law on family matters is like your shadow. It follows you, even if you've been living abroad for your entire life. So let's look at the actual case that posed our opening question. Way back in 1947, two Filipinos, attorney Luna and Eugenia Zabalilo, they get married. Fast forward almost 3 decades to 1976. Attorney Luna flies to the Dominican Republic, gets a divorce decree, and immediately marries another woman, Soledad Lavadia. So why is this a huge problem? It all comes down to that nationality principle. What it means is you can't just hop on a plane and use another country's laws to get around Philippine family law. If you're a Filipino citizen, our laws on marriage, its duties, and your legal status, they stick to you like glue wherever you go. And this leads us to the Supreme Court's absolutely crystal clear ruling on this. The court has said, with no room for argument, that a divorce obtained abroad between two Filipino citizens is just not recognized. It has zero legal effect here in the Philippines. So the bottom line is, his first marriage never legally ended. That piece of paper from the Dominican Republic, as far as Philippine law was concerned, it was meaningless. This meant his second marriage was bigamous, which is just the legal term for marrying someone while you're still married to somebody else. And because of that, it was completely void from the start. I mean, think about the implications of that. His entire second family had no legal standing. It's staggering. So, is there any way around this? Yes. But it is very, very specific. The one and only exception is laid out in Article 26 of the Family Code. Here's how it works. If a Filipino is married to a foreigner, and, this is the key part, the foreign spouse is the one who gets a valid divorce in their own country, then and only then is the Filipino spouse free to remarry under Philippine law. That is the only loophole. Okay, so what if the first marriage was never even valid in the first place? This brings us to a really fascinating paradox, a situation where the answer to a legal question depends not on what happened, but on when it happened. It's like a legal time machine. So let's look at the Castillo case. A woman's first marriage back in '72 was void from the get-go because it was missing a marriage license. So legally, it was like it never happened. 7 years later, she remarries, but she never bothered to go to court to get that first marriage officially declared void. So the big question is her second marriage legit? The entire answer to that question hangs on a single, crucial date, August 3rd, 1988. This is the day the Family Code went into effect, and it completely changed the rules of the game. And notice, both of Castillo's marriages happened before this critical date. And this slide just lays out the dramatic shift perfectly. Before 1988, under the old civil code, if your marriage was void from the start, you didn't need a court to state the obvious. You could just go ahead and remarry. That is why Castillo's second marriage was considered valid. But after that key date, the new Family Code dropped Article 40, which made a court order absolutely mandatory. If her case happened today, her second marriage would be totally void. It just goes to show you, in this area of law, timing is literally everything. Now let's shift gears to one of the most talked about and maybe most misunderstood grounds for nullity, psychological incapacity. Now, this isn't about just not getting along. It's about a profound, deep-seated inability to fulfill the essential duties of marriage, and how the courts see this has changed in a huge way over the years. For many years, if you wanted to nullify your marriage on these grounds, you had to prove these 3 things. First, gravity. This means it has to be a genuine, severe inability to perform your marital duties, not just, a bad attitude or a personality flaw. Second, juridical antecedents. It's a fancy term, but it just means the problem had to exist before or at the time you got married, even if it only showed up later. And finally, incurability. The condition had to be permanent. And it's this last one that has been at the center of a major legal earthquake. For years, proving all of this, especially that incurability part, was incredibly difficult. It often meant you needed teams of doctors and psychologists, which just wasn't possible for a lot of people. But a huge landmark case has come along and completely changed the entire landscape. And this right here perfectly illustrates that massive shift. The old rule, the Molina Doctrine, basically forced you to prove a clinical medical personality disorder. But the new Tandal ruling says, whoa, hold on. Psychological incapacity is a legal concept, not a medical one. You don't need an expert psychiatrist to testify anymore. And this is the real game changer. Incurability no longer means medically permanent. It now means that the marital breakdown is simply irreparable for that specific couple. It's a much more humane and realistic standard that focuses on the reality of the relationship, not a medical textbook. Okay, so let's say you do have grounds to end your marriage. What's the process really like? Well, the legal system actually tries to get couples to solve their problems without a massive, contentious court fight. For many people, the very first step isn't a courtroom at all. It's mediation. For a lot of family law cases, the first stop is the mediation table. The court will actually refer the couple to a trained mediator. And the goal is simple. Let's see if you can reach an agreement on your own terms with the help of a neutral third party before you have to go through a full-blown trial. So what can you actually work out in mediation? Well, it's the practical, logistical stuff, the nuts and bolts of separating your lives. We're talking about financial support, who the kids will live with, how you're going to divide up your property, things like that. These are all the issues where the court really encourages compromise. But, and this is a really big but, there are some things that are completely off the table. The law is very clear. You cannot compromise on your civil status. You can't just agree that your marriage is over. That's a decision for a judge. Same goes for the legal reasons for the separation. And most importantly, any cases that involve violence are immediately excluded from mediation. These are matters of public policy that demand a court's final judgment. So, after going through all of these complex rules, these landmark cases, and these different procedures, what are the big takeaways? Let's try to sum it all up. First, that nationality rule is king. For two Filipinos, a foreign divorce is basically invisible to our legal system. Second, when it comes to void marriages, that 1988 date is the absolute dividing line between needing a court order or not. Third, psychological incapacity has evolved from a strict medical standard to a more flexible legal one focused on the relationship itself. And finally, the justice system really does want you to try and settle things amicably through mandatory mediation. And that leaves us with one final big picture question. All of these rules, all of these high legal bars and specific procedures, they're all designed to protect marriage as this inviolable social institution. But it's worth asking, in the real world, does this legal framework ultimately protect the well-being of the family, or does it end up prioritizing the institution itself, sometimes at the family's expense? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of Philippine family law.